Are sports food for Archons? Are sports food for Archons? Are sports food for Archons? I wanted to repeat that to make sure that we got the beginning on the YouTube, on the Twitter, and on the Facebook feeds. I'm broadcasting live tonight on all three from the Gulf Coast of Florida, Clearwater, Florida, to be specific. I've posted, this will be the 5th show that we've posted today, so I hope that you're enjoying all of the high quality programming. I just recently posted the radio interview that I had with Jim Rivas on WGSO in New Orleans. It was on Thursday night and streaming live across the internet. So please go listen to that. It was a great interview. I think it's over an hour long, maybe even more than that. But it was live in New Orleans. Some of you who heard it in New Orleans have been in contact with me, told me it was a great interview. I appreciate that. And many of you that heard it live online also were very appreciative, and I thank you very much for that. And we've had some other great programming today, so make sure you check it out. Trying to get back to my production level. And we've had some challenges. We've been on the road, so here we are, the Gospel Truth Channel, Jeffrey Daugherty, the Gospel Truth Army. Don't tread on us. We're locked and loaded, ready to make a difference in this world. I spent 20 years as a Pentecostal minister. I'm a Bible college graduate. I have over 100,000 hours of study in the biblical scriptures, and I'm here to show you what I consider to be incontrovertible evidence that Christianity is a fear and guilt-based control matrix, and that you are most likely under a spiritual Stockholm syndrome. And I'm hoping to get you to think for yourself and take steps towards unindoctrinating yourself. Now, not only was I a preacher, and not only did I spend 6 years in the United States Air Force, I was also for many years an athlete. I grew up playing baseball. I grew up playing football. Played football, well into my teens and early 20s. And then I also played hockey. I just recently retired about 2 years ago. And I was playing competitive hockey, at the age of 53. So I've always been an athlete. I was a bodybuilder for many years. I've always been an athlete and always been pretty good at it. And I say that because the subject that I'm talking about tonight, some might be saying, oh, well, he's one of those guys that got sand kicked in his face on the beach. He was a 98-pound weakling. He never could succeed at sports. So he was talking, that's why he's going to talk this way about sports. But not only have I always enjoyed playing sports, I, for many years, was an avid sports fan as a spectator. My first love has always been hockey, was a season ticket holder for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Watched lots of Portland Winterhawk hockey out in Portland, Oregon when I was in Portland. Tri-City American hockey when I was in Eastern Oregon. Big fan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at least was in times past. Never really cared for the NBA, but a big NHL fan. I do have a Tampa Bay Rays American League Championship replica ring on my finger, not because I really care about baseball, but because my father does, and he gave it to me. And always been an athlete, always been a big fan. But I started thinking today about sports. And I started thinking today about the Archons, and I started thinking about what sports really is. And I started looking into the history of sporting events, the history of competitive sports. And what I found was staggering. And what I found actually served, unfortunately, to fuel my speculation and to cause me to want to make this broadcast. Let's take a look real quick into the Wikipedia under the subject, the history of sport. And before you start hollering at me and taking exception, consider the history I'm telling you about. Consider the empirical, objective knowledge that we're looking at. From Wikipedia, the history of sports, listen to this, extends back as far back as the beginnings of military training. Do you understand what you're hearing, ladies and gentlemen? Competitive sports has always been inexorably linked with military training. I mean, even today, you have the color guards, you have the military people coming out and, taking a lap, throwing out the first pitch, dropping the puck, whatever. From the very beginnings of competitive sports, there has been this strong presence of the military because in the very beginning, sports were about preparing you for military training. Sports were used as a means to determine which individuals were the most fit for combat. It makes sense. If you got a guy who can run faster than all the other people, a guy that can jump higher than all the other people, the guy that can throw a spear farther, the guy that can throw a rock the farthest, the guy that can excel in the hand-to-hand combat. And we're talking about, thousands and thousands of years ago, probably 50,000 years ago, back to the dawn of human culture. And this is the way that war was waged back then, ladies and gentlemen. It was hand-to-hand. It was mano a mano. Now, of course, there was still military strategy and armies and weaponry and all those things, but it wasn't the push-button warfare that we have today. So it makes perfect sense that competitive sports go back to military training. And I'm a firm believer that the genesis of something, the start of something, the inspiration of something carries through that thing for as long as that thing is used, applied, or practiced. So we have to address the fact and understand the fact that competitive sports began as a means of determining who is the best for military purposes. So competitive sports are the best for military training. I mean, come on. Do you think that Mike Tyson would make a good Marine? Probably so. Do you think that LeBron James, who can jump higher and run faster, might make an effective warrior? I think so. I mean, do you think that Aaron Rodgers might be a good tactician as a general? Yeah, I think so. So military training has always been used, or sports has always been used as a means of military training to determine which individuals were best and most fit for service, or even which were fit for service. If you can't play in sports at all, then you probably can't be a soldier, because you probably can't march, you probably can't carry a rifle, you probably can't do hand-to-hand combat. And it goes on to say that team sports most likely evolved to train and prove the capability to fight and work together as a team, as an army. So not only were we trying to find the best as far as the people that had the ability to be soldiers, people that had the ability to be officers and leaders, but also team sports, you take those people that are good at it, because you have tryouts. We still have tryouts today. And back in the day, I guarantee you, it wasn't everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets to play. No, it was the best that played. And the best that played were put together and taught to work as a team. And I was a quarterback in football for a few years. And you go into that huddle, you take command of that huddle just like a general. You say the play. You tell them what the snap count is. There's no discussion. What are they doing? They're learning how to follow orders. Every man on that field, and I know sometimes there's girls on the field now too, they have a specific assignment. And they do, and they perform their assignment. And when all 11, if we're talking football, when all 6, if we're talking hockey, including the goaltender, when they all do their job, then your team functions efficiently, and you're probably going to win more than you lose. Because most losses in sports, even if you look at it today, most losses in sports aren't typically they aren't typically because somebody makes a great play. They're typically because of a breakdown in fundamental technique on one team or the other. I apologize for my throat, but I'm not going to stop. So sports not only identifies the people best suited for military, sports not only trains and hones those that are best and trains and hones those that are adequate, it also teaches us to follow orders, and also teaches us to do our assignment, and it also teaches us the necessity of completing our assignment above all else. And when you step back and start to look at that objectively, it starts to sound like training for a beehive. It starts to sound like training for a segmented population. It starts to sound like training for a control matrix. Do your job. Don't ask questions. Perform your tasks. And as we look at it, as we look at the history of sports, if my touchpad will work for me, there we go. Cave paintings and the Lascaux caves in France have suggested that they depict sprinting and wrestling in the upper Paleolithic period. 15,000 years ago. I said 50,000 years ago because that's when the earliest evidence of religious practice began to show up in human culture. But let's say they're right. Only 15,000 years ago in the upper Paleolithic period. There's cave paintings in Mongolia dating back to 7,000 BC that show a wrestling match surrounded by crowds. Rock art in the Wadi Sura shows swimming. Libya shows evidence of swimming and archery to 6,000 BC. Prehistoric cave paintings have been found in Japan depicting a sport similar to sumo wrestling. So there has been sports as far as there's been a need for military, as long as there's been a need for military action. And it makes perfect sense when you look at it in context. An ancient Sumer. We hear a lot about ancient Sumer, but when's the last time you talked about or heard someone talking about organized sports, competitive sports in ancient Sumer? There were, ladies and gentlemen, representations of wrestlers from the Sumerian era, 3000 BCE, Iraq, cuneiform tablets, Gilgamesh talking about sports. The Sumerian king Shulgi boasts of his prowess in sports. Fishing hooks show evidence of angling, not just catching fish for sustenance, but actually for angling in ancient Egypt. Monuments to the pharaohs at Bene Hassan dating to 2000 BCE indicate there was a number of sports being practiced: wrestling, weightlifting, long jump, swimming, rowing, archery, and again, fishing, javelin throwing, ball games. Ancient Greece, ritual sporting events, and the Minoan art of the Bronze Age in Crete. fresco paintings dating back to 1500 of gymnastics. The origins of Greek sporting festivals date to the funeral games of the Mycenaean period. We all know about the Olympics. The first Olympic Games were recorded in 776 BC. Think about that. 800 years before the modern era, they were having the Olympics. I think they just finished the Olympics over in Korea. Chariot racing, long jump, javelin throwing, discus throwing. And as an interesting note, most of that was done in the nude, which is a little weird and a little interesting. Hurling in ancient Ireland, shinty in Scotland, rugby in China, polo in Persia, ancient sports, and of course through the Middle Ages, into modern sports, into the British Empire, into the United States, even down into the entrance of women into sporting events and into sporting itself. So very interesting. To me, very exciting. And it really gives us something to ponder. It really gives us something to think about. And may I suggest to you that there's a lot more here than what we're seeing. Because remember, sporting events go back to military. I think that we've proven historically that the advent of sports is tied directly to the advent of the military. And unfortunately, if you're a person that feeds off of fear and killing, you can't always have wars. You can't always have wars. There's going to be some times where there's not going to be a war. But you can always have sports. I mean, right now, you've got Major League Baseball starting up, spring training. You've got the National Hockey League heading into its playoff stretch. You've got the NBA that just had their All-Star game. We just had the Super Bowl. And there's probably bowling or something else going on. Golf is going on right now. So there's tons and tons of sports. And like I said, you can't always have war, but you can always have sports. And if you're an archonic being, if you're a being that feeds on bloodshed, of course you want bloodshed. But if you're a being that feeds on the competitive hatred and ire and fire that is bred by warfare, I mean, it's like you'd rather have a steak, but if you can't get a steak, you're willing to have a hot dog. So if you can't always have a war, you could always have some sports. And having played sports and having been in the military, I can understand the competitive nature that is involved in sports. And sometimes when you're there, when you're playing, you can slip in your mind into this, you slip into your fight or flight mode. You slip into your kill or be killed mode. I mean, that's why these, you think you watch these guys crush each other on the football field. You watch these guys crush each other on the hockey ice. And I was there, and you get, your blood starts pumping. Your adrenaline starts pumping. Somebody is trying to, I was a goalie, score on me, trying to take, advantage of me, trying to infringe into my crease. And man, I tell you what, I would get nasty. I would chop people down with that big goalie stick. It got competitive. And don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that archonic beings are not feeding on that competitive fire. Don't think for a second, ladies and gentlemen, that the same beings that feed on bloodshed and fear and anger, don't think that they're not feeding on the emotions being broadcast and emanated from the athletes involved in sporting competition. And now you're talking about athletes with millions and millions of dollars at stake. Most people don't realize this, but almost all of the sports, player signs $100 million contract. But what you don't realize is that contract, and these are players, not coaches, that contract might be for $100 million for 10 years, but guess what? He's going to make the team every year. You sign a quarterback to a $100 million contract for 10 years. If in year 2 he can't make the team, guess what? He doesn't get any more money. Now, there's a lot of permutations and a lot of variations, but generally speaking, their pay for play, you have to remain on the team to get paid. So literally, not only are these guys, and even in women's sports, these gals, not only are they having that fire and that adrenaline, but there's millions of dollars at stake. Don't think for a second, even in curling, crypto crouton, don't think for a second Twitter, don't think for a second YouTube, don't think for a second Facebook that there's not intense, powerful, energetic emanations coming from these athletes. And think about the coaches. Think about the owners. Think about the executives. There's powerful, energetic emanations bring broadcast. It's a little more refined than it used to be in the Colosseum at Rome, but the result is the same. It's still feeding the Archon entities that live on that type of energy. Iowa X makes an excellent point. College football coaches, highest paid state employees. It hurts me to say it. It really does. Because I've always been a sports fan. I've always been a participant in sports. And I'd probably still be playing if my hips and my knees could support the up and down of a butterfly style goalie. I'd still be playing if I didn't loathe skating out so much. I only want to play goal. That's all I want to do. So it's hard for me. It's hard for me. I've pretty much weaned myself off of football. I've weaned myself off of everything. I still watch the Tampa Bay Lightning. I admit it. I'm trying to quit it because I know in my heart what I'm supporting. And the fans, we haven't even talked about the fans. How many times have you been in the fan in a stadium and watched grown men, grown women yelling and screaming at each other like lunatics? How many times have you seen grown men and grown women getting in fights, physical altercations over sports? Over sports. Think of the billions of dollars that are spent in sports, on sports, through sports. And we haven't even mentioned the real money, which of course is wagering, betting. And all of this is feeding the Archons, but we hadn't even got to the biggest part yet, in my opinion. What's the biggest part? The biggest part are the soul farms. The biggest part is the soul farms. Jeff, what are you talking about? I'm talking about arenas as smorgasbords for Archons. They're sitting around the Amalie Arena when the Tampa Bay Lightning are playing the Montreal Canadiens, and it's intense on the ice. It's intense in the stands. It's intense for those of us that are watching on TV that shouldn't be. And all that energy is feeding them. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Just because you've left this life, just because you've died, doesn't mean you can't watch hockey anymore. Because I'm convinced, ladies and gentlemen, there is a hockey soul farm. It's a place in the sweet by and by up in the sky after you die that's built all around hockey world. There's Elvis world. There's Rolling Stones world. There's Rat Pack world. There's football world. There's worlds run by spiritual archons that you can choose to go to when you pass out of here. And you can continue to feed them just the same way that you're feeding them today. I know you think it sounds crazy, but I've seen them. And they're real. So what are we saying? What are we saying? What are we really saying? Are we saying that we should never play any sports? Are we saying that we should never watch any sports? I don't know. I really don't know. Now, if you can get into a situation where you're, playing an individual sport, you're golfing, you're lifting weights, you're running, you're working out. And if you can direct your energy for the right reasons, health, fitness, spiritual clarity, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you can get to the place where you can go out with your friends and have a friendly game of basketball, a friendly game of touch football, even a friendly game of shinny, which is a hockey term many of you may not understand, then I think it's probably okay. But when we get to the place where we're projecting and emanating the competitive, the fiery, the hatred, the power, the one-upsmanship, the I got to win at all expenses, I think we're now feeding archons. And if you want to feed archons, you can. It's totally up to you. I'm just trying to give you something to ponder. I'm trying to give you something to think about. I'm trying to give you something to consider, because there's no doubt that the history shows that military conflict, killing fools, is the seed of sporting events, of competitive sports. Even today, terms like the gridiron, it's a real battle out here today. It's a war between Dallas and Philadelphia. It was a battle to the end between the Patriots and who was it? The Eagles. It's a war for the Stanley Cup. Think about it. Maybe it's time as spiritual people that we said, no more bread and circuses. Maybe it's time that we said, you know what? Keep your Super Bowl. I've got things better to do. I don't care what you do with Stanley's Cup. I need to fill my own cup. I don't know what you do, care what you do with the World Series. I need to get serious about my world. What if we took the strong emotions? What if we took the incredible devotion? What if we took the passion and directed that power, that enthusiasm, that passion, that money, that time that we've invested in competitive sports, and direct that towards our spiritual progression? What would happen? What would happen? How would our lives be changed? How would our world be changed? What would happen if? What would happen if? What would happen if modern day gladiators, sports and fans bred in circuses? I'm reading through the chat. In the military, it's not acceptable if you think for yourself. It's almost the same in sports. Do your job. I didn't watch any of the Olympics. Neither did I. We compete against life. Sports is to compete against one another. And it's another way of divide and conquer, isn't it? I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out. Yeah. Very interesting. Something really to consider. Stadiums or temples to Saturn. We wear black and gold Hawkheads around here. She's in Iowa. The Hawkeyes. Feed the Archon, yellow tennis balls. America started going soft and they started wearing boxing gloves. Greek and Roman gladiators. My dad's addicted to watching sports. Super Bowl wasn't watched by the Jennifer Strong family. Me neither. Jeff, do you believe that Jesus and the Christ are two different people? I wrote a book about it, Jesus and the Christ. Absolutely. Some things we know for sure. Some things can't be argued. The history of competitive sports began out of a desire to determine the best warriors, to train the best warriors, and to train the adequate on how to be warriors. But I think it goes deeper than that. You can't always have war, but you can always have sports. I believe it's the preferred diet of the Archons. And I don't know about you, but I think I'm tired of being on the smorgasbord. I'm tired of being on the menu. And I'm really going to seriously consider what I'm supporting. I'm really going to seriously consider what type of energetic emanations I'm projecting. I'm going to sit back and take stock of what's going on. And as I sit here in a Don't Tread on Me hat and in a military blouse, talking about the Gospel Truth Army, I think you know we're not going to roll over and play dead. I think you know we're not going to tuck our tail between our legs and just allow the rat bastard, the Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh, Marduk, Sackless, Yaldabaoth. We're not just going to allow him to run roughshod over us. We're saying to Yaldabaoth and all of his cohorts, don't tread on us. We're the Gospel Truth Army. We're going to rise up and strike you. Everybody wants to know, why doesn't God do something? The gods did something. They made us in their image. Next time you want to ask why God doesn't do something to change the way the world is, ask yourself, because you're God. If it is to be, it's up to me. If not now, when? If not me, whom? That's what it means to be part of the Gospel Truth Army. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. We are the Gospel Truth Army. I salute you. I hope that you will make the decision to guide your own spirit. I hope that you will make the decision to be your own guru. I hope that you will make the decision to master your own ascension. And by the way, earlier today, I had a little back and forth with a very nice individual that was upset that they hadn't received their rods. And I received a nice apology note from them because guess what happened today? They received their rods and they love them. We're 100% caught up on rods, 100% caught up on Mystic. So if you want either or both, or pendulums or books or t-shirts, we're caught up. And now's the time to grab them while the grabbing's good. You are the Gospel Truth Army. I salute you. I salute you on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. March on fearlessly and unindoctrinate yourself.